There was a time when motoring was the pastime of the rich. It was very expensive to own and drive a car. There were a huge number of car makers in Europe, but most put out very small numbers. The Germans were no different. There was a lot of small car makers all trying to get attention, but what Germany really needed was something that was cheap, easy and fast to make. Everybody points a finger at the Volkswagen Beetle and says that Adolf Hitler was the one who created that car. He didn't really. It actually goes back to a point between two wars. Between the First and the Second World War, you've got this point of life where everybody's scrabbling for some money. And Hitler actually loved what Henry Ford was doing in the US. And so he looked to an experienced car maker, a man named Ferdinand Porsche. Mr. Porsche was ahead of his time. In 1932, the first version of the Beetle was built by a company called NSU. That company later became Audi. Porsche decided to put the idea of a people's car to the government of the time. His idea for a cheap, mass-producible car sounded like the idea Henry Ford had, so it got funding, and in 1936 he made some prototypes for experimentation. Porsche created a trial run in 1936 so that the cars could cover 50,000 kilometers and finish in Porsche's private estate. The cars passed with flying colours and fitted in nicely with the ideals of the government. So Ferdinand Porsche then continued making his car, continued developing his car, only to be interrupted by, well, a giant war. World War II basically halted production and sale of the People's Car Type 1, as all that production was going to making the war machine work. Production of the KDF wagon, as it was now known, was slowed, and then the KDF Stadt factory in Wolfsburg was bombed. There was a number of KDF wagons given out to the high-ranking officers, but that was largely it. By the end of the war, something strange had happened. The Allied forces needed reliable personal transport, so they looked to a young major in the British forces named Ivan Hurst. He first took over the factory and started producing enough KDF wagons for the carpools. By the end of 1946, Hurst was producing 1,000 cars a month from Wolfsburg. The Allied forces put in an order for 20,000 Beetles to be produced, so finally, just as Hitler wanted, the People's Car was on the Autobahn, but transporting British and Allied forces. There's one Irishman that stands out in this entire story of the Beetle, and it's Stephen J. O'Flaherty. In 1945, O'Flaherty met Heinrich Nordhoff, the now MD at Volkswagen. They met at the Paris Motor Show. Once it was possible to do business with Germany again, he proposed sending cars to Ireland. Indeed, in 1950, Volkswagen decided to export cars, and they turned to Ireland and Stephen. The cars are sent over unassembled, and the first VW Beetle assembled outside Germany is done at an unused tram depot, 162 Shelburne Road, Ballsbridge. The first Beetle assembled in Dublin is still on display today in the Wolfsburg Museum. Irish assembled Beetles rose from an output of just 46 units in 1950 to 2,155 units in 1952. This necessitated a move in 1985 to a new factory premises on the Naas Road. Taking over this whole area to make Volkswagens. Assembly of the Beetle continued there until 1977, when the production of the car ceased in Europe. Some of the halls are much darker than others, but you can see the length of the halls where we would have had the rail along the roof. That line of lights that goes up along there right now, that would have been a rail where you bring the cars and the bodies of the cars along the assembly line. This actually right now leads back out into the yard where they still service Mercedes trucks and they still look after the Mercedes fleet in general. Oh, the stories this building could tell. This is the last of the breed, standing beside its great-grandson. It's a long way from the KDF wagon of the 40s. So this is a 1978 Beetle, and this is where it all began for a lot of these cars. Now this one hasn't been started in a while, so I'm going to give it a shot here and see what happens. No, that's not the key. Let's try that key. Reliability. This has not been started in weeks, I was told. Reliability wise, you know, these cars work. 1978, it's near as old as me. It's still operational. Let's let it warm up for a little bit and then I'll take it for a spin. Porsche had already developed a flat 4-cylinder air-cooled motor in 1931 for the Type 12 and found it to be reliable, but you can't say it was fast. The fast when it gets going, it's just getting it going, getting it used to moving along. As this is an air-cooled engine, and you can hear that the air-cooled engine spins up rather well, but they're only really useful when you're moving. The problem is when you stand still, they just heat up continuously until there's nothing left. This drives really well, really smoothly. It is a left-hand drive, it is a convertible, it's a 1978. It's probably one of the more desirable ones if you're thinking about investing in a classic car. This is the kind of one you want to go for. So the thing Hitler needed, and this is before the Second World War, this is what Ferdinand Porsche was trying to design. He wanted a car that looked a bit like a real Beetle, because Beetles were aerodynamic. And he wanted a car that could do 100 kilometers an hour on an Autobahn. That's basically what this car is capable of. I'm not going to do it today. Back in 1978, I could probably do it. In the early 70s, Volkswagen tried to find a successor to the Beetle. Something that would sell well, but not cost the earth to make. They tried multiple kinds of models, but nothing really found any sort of success until the Golf, which in America was called the Rabbit. They started to sell that. Once Volkswagen found that new lineup, it became the Passat, the Golf, the Polo and the Scirocco could now all take over what the Beetle left behind. But it wasn't until this point of history is where Volkswagen started to find real success. This car became very popular in the 60s, 50s in the US because they wanted something that was a bit more fuel efficient, a little bit more reliable. That's exactly what this car was. And once we got into the flower power era, this became Herbie, a symbol for freedom from the US, a symbol for everything that was hippie in the entire world. 10 years after the end of the European production for the Beetle, Volkswagen revealed the all-new Beetle, and it was very quickly found homes across the world until 2011, when this model was scrapped. Now it's coming to the end of the road once again for the Beetle, and although I've reviewed it over the years, I still have a soft spot for the car that changed the world. So here I am in the most modern and the final version of the Volkswagen Beetle. Never to be another one. Maybe there'll be an electric one, maybe there'll be a hybrid one. It's the world's, well, debatably the longest single name production car out there. So it's sold the most, it's been around the longest. And here we are trundling along in a car that was born between two wars, was the savior of a country, was the biggest start that the motor industry ever had, was the first car produced outside of Germany in Ireland. And now we're saying goodbye. The Beetle, however, became more and more of a niche product. And the more niche it became, the more difficult it became for dealers to sell them. And so ever-decreasing circles of people who didn't want a Beetle anymore. Well, maybe there isn't a position for something like this in the future. Now might be a good time to start collecting the Beetle. Maybe we'll see it again in the future in an electric or hybrid or hydrogen or maybe a flying car. I don't know. Whatever. I'm gonna miss that kind of car. Okay, so thank you very much for watching. Hopefully you've subscribed by now and you've learned something there is to learn about the Volkswagen Beetle and the Volkswagen legacy. Until the next time, I will see you on the far side.